The Marriage Stone by Josephine Darcy. Chapter 33. Tall Tales. Several hours later, Severus found himself sitting next to Remus Lupin at a long wooden table in the main hall. The hall was crowded with people, warriors who had flewed in from the other fortresses in the Winterland at a summons from Aesir, and they were all feasting heartily before the great battle that was to commence the following day. Though Harry looked exhausted, he was seated next to his godfather, listening in fascination to a story Sirius was telling a group of warriors about some exploit of his and James Potter's when they had both been Aurors so many years ago. Sirius was very much in his element, surrounded by lackeys who hung on his every word. Severus could see the bright young man he had been in Hogwarts. It seemed as if even all those years in Azkaban could not entirely diminish that light that had so enamored Remus Lupin. Indeed, the werewolf was watching the proceedings with gleaming eyes, his gaze never leaving Sirius's face, though he was careful to school his expression into something less obvious than hero worship. Frankly, Severus found the whole thing annoying. Even Harry looked captivated by the marauder, and it made something that felt remarkably like jealousy burn inside Severus. He turned his thoughts to the conversation they'd had with Harry earlier instead, his mind still focused on that stone. By his estimate, it had to weigh between 4,000 and 5,000 pounds, perhaps even more than that. And Harry assured them he'd lifted it with little difficulty. He had no doubt in his mind that Albus could do such a thing, or Flitwick, but both those men were masters of charms. Harry was no master. He, of course, knew the boy was strong. They all knew that. But this was more than he had expected. "Lupin," he interrupted the werewolf's romantic musings, "could you lift that stone?" Lupin was better than him at charms. Always had been. He'd been in the top of their class at Hogwarts in the subject. Remus laughed softly under his breath. "Not even on a good day," he admitted, glancing over at him with an amused look in his eyes. "I've been thinking the same thing all evening. I once levitated a small Muggle automobile, but it couldn't have been even half the weight of that stone, and it took everything I had." Severus found himself nodding in understanding. He'd lifted a number of heavy objects in his life, though not an automobile. "I thought about saying something to Harry," Remus continued, "but if he said he did it, then I know he did, and I was afraid anything I might say would make him doubt himself tomorrow." "I thought the same," Severus agreed, and suspected Sirius had stayed silent for the same reason. "How's your Patronus?" "Adequate," Remus shrugged. "Not like Harry's, of course, but it will get the job done." "And what about Black?" Severus questioned. "I've never seen him throw one before." "Neither have I," Remus admitted, "but I trust him. If he says he can handle it, then I know he can." Such faith. It was such a pathetically Gryffindor thing to say that Severus wanted to mock the man for it. But he thought of something a bit more cutting to say instead. "Well, judging by the way those women are eyeing him, I've no doubt Black will have all the happy memories he needs from tonight." Remus whirled his head back around toward his companion as if he'd been slapped, his amber gaze immediately seeking out the women in question. Indeed, there were a group of young, rather well-endowed women watching the notorious outlaw, their eyes gleaming with a certain lustful hunger. But contrary to Severus's words, Black had not yet appeared to have noticed them. Remus, however, while giving Severus the predictable reaction he had been expecting, was not as ignorant as the Slytherin remembered. "I'd say Sirius isn't the only one who's caught the eye of the local wildlife," he remarked, somewhat cattily, as he nodded his head toward a group of younger girls closer to Harry's age. Severus's eyes narrowed. The group of girls ranged from perhaps 14 years of age to at least 20, and all of them were eyeing the young man rather hungrily. And while the girls of Hogwarts were rather reserved in their interactions with the boys their own age, Severus was very much aware of the fact that these girls, even the younger ones, had no such restraint. This society tended to live fast and hard, and if Harry offered any sort of encouragement, they would jump at the chance to share his bed this night. He also had no doubt that many of their mothers had given the girls fertility potions and urged them to lure one of the visiting men into their beds. Having a child with a boy who lived, or one of his companions, would be considered a great blessing among such a group. Severus threw a dark frown at the werewolf, who just glared right back. "So, the two of them were not so different. Didn't mean they had to bond over the subject." And he certainly was not going to discuss his jealousy with the Gryffindor. His emotions were going to stay firmly where they had always been. Buried. While Sirius regaled the crowd of warriors with stories, Remus found himself spending most of the evening enduring the good-natured teasing of the warriors around him. Unlike his companions, Remus was an unknown quantity in this crowd. They all knew Harry Potter, and everyone had heard of Sirius Black and Severus Snape. They acknowledged those three men as superiors and treated them with respect due their stations. They had no idea what to think of Remus Lupin. In the end, they seemed to decide that he was a little different from the rest of them, though worthy of respect by the company he kept. It opened Remus to a great deal more teasing than the others had to endure. The gist of their joking seemed to be his choice of weapon. More than one man had commented on the size of the mace leaning up against the table by his chair. One brave soul had finally decided to test its weight himself, something Remus doubted they would have dared do with Severus or Sirius. The man, a blonde, muscle-bound giant, though perhaps no more than 25 years of age, lifted the heavy mace with both hands, grinning at his companions when he confirmed it weighed as much as they had guessed it did. Far too much for someone like Remus to wield successfully. "We'll get you another weapon, lad." The warrior grinned at Remus, despite the fact that Remus was at least a decade older than him. "My sister has a blade that would be about the right size for you." His words were met with laughter from the others. Remus just smiled at the man and reached across to take the mace from him. He lifted the heavy weapon out of the warrior's grip with only one hand, tossing it briefly in the air as if it weighed no more than a dagger. "No thanks," he repeated as he laid the mace once again beside him. "The mace suits me just fine." The man's eyes had widened in amazement, and indeed several other warriors had leaned forward for a better look at him, as if not believing he had done such a thing. Far from being angry or embarrassed, the young warrior just grinned and sat down across from him, propping his arm up on the table. "You're stronger than you look. We must arm wrestle." While Remus just stared at the man in disbelief, a dozen other men gathered around them, all seeming to think this was a grand idea. Of course, he suspected in a society like this, arm wrestling likely passed for a form of entertainment. "You'd lose," he warned the man. But the warrior just grinned harder. "Prove it." And so, while Sirius entertained one half of the crowd with wild stories, Remus found himself arm wrestling warrior after warrior, all wanting to test their strength against him. Surprisingly, despite losing one after another with seemingly no effort on Remus's part, none of them were deterred. Indeed, several men came back more than once to try again. Remus found the whole thing perplexing. Eventually, they gave up and brought him food and drink for his effort, one man after another clapping him on the back as if they were now old friends. Bemused, he turned his attention to his companions instead, seeing that Sirius, Harry, and Severus were now listening to Ulrich retell the story of Harry's fight against the Dementors the night before. The warriors, who had not heard the story, were hanging on Ulrich's every word, more than one man turning to stare at the now blushing boy who lived when Ulrich described Harry's Patronus as the Royal White Stag. These men, Remus had noticed, were given to metaphorical embellishment, but he found that description ringing oddly in his ears. It was aptly described. He had seen prongs himself and knew how impressive he could be. But Royal White Stag was a phrase Remus was certain he had read in a book somewhere. The memory, however, proved difficult to grasp. Severus, he noticed, was listening to the story with a strange gleam in his eyes as well, as if he too had recognized something in the description. But perhaps he was just disturbed by the numerous young ladies who were determined to bring more food or drink for Harry the moment he so much as touched something on his plate. It was not the first time Remus had smelled jealousy or lust coming from Severus when he was focused on Harry. It might have worried him if he had not seen the way Severus had hugged Harry that afternoon in front of the castle, as if he'd been given his very life back at that moment. Severus might be more prone to the darker emotions in life, but it was obvious Harry brought out the lighter ones in him as well. Against his bidding, he found his gaze drifting back to Sirius. Time and time again, he found himself unable to look away from the marauder, the wolf in him so possessive of the man, despite the fact that he had not taken him as a mate. The wolf did not seem to care. Truthfully, the man in him did not seem to care either. Despite the fact that he had exchanged no promises with Sirius, and had not encouraged his flirtations, he knew himself well enough to know that there was no one in this world for him but Sirius. The blue-eyed man had stolen his heart years ago when he'd first seen him on their sorting day in the Great Hall of Hogwarts. Sirius had stolen his heart that day, and 5 years later, when he and the others revealed they had become animagus, so they could keep the werewolf company, he had quite effectively stolen Remus's soul. But the Sirius of his youth had been flighty and fickle when it came to love, and Remus could not bear to risk their friendship simply because the wolf wanted his mate. He had spent his entire life denying the wolf. He could continue to do so. Oh, but Severus's words earlier that night had stung, and Remus had returned the barb just as sharply. Trouble was, Severus could be fairly certain that he could chase off all Harry's young suitors this night. For all Harry's maturity, he did not think long or hard on romance the way other young men did. For all Harry's maturity, he did not think long or hard on romance, the way other young men might. Certainly Ron Weasley spared more than a passing thought to the girls he knew. But Harry had seemed too haunted, or perhaps too hunted, to dwell overly long on such things. But Remus had no such assurances. Indeed, Sirius reveled in the attention he had attracted, playing up to the crowd that gathered around him. Even now, he could hear him telling the women sitting beside him about one of his daring escapes from the Dementors out to hunt down the notorious outlaw. Harry's proclamation of Sirius's innocence had relegated Sirius Black to the status of Robin Hood. Even now, Remus's overly sensitive ears could hear several women bickering over who would bed Sirius this night. A young blonde who reminded Remus uncomfortably of one of Sirius's old girlfriends appeared to be the forerunner in the fight. She was currently sitting beside the dark-haired man, gazing adoringly at his face. It was all Remus could do not to go over there and shove her away. When he saw the girl slide her hand onto Sirius's thigh, he felt his proverbial hackles rise and found himself gripping his goblet hard enough to dent the metal. The girl made no secret of her intentions, and though she whispered her words to Sirius, Remus could hear her clearly. "Do you want some company tonight?" All Sirius had to do was smile, and the bargain would be set. Remus could do nothing at all to stop it, and perhaps it was shameful of him to even begrudge Sirius this thing. Though Severus's words had been meant to sting, there had been some truth in them. Remus, of all people, knew what torment it would be for Sirius to face those Dementors tomorrow. How could he begrudge Sirius the memories he might need to get through the battle? He found himself unable to look up, but equally unable to shut his ears as he waited for Sirius's answer. "I'm sorry, my lady," he heard Sirius's gentle voice. "My heart belongs to another." Remus looked up in shock, his gaze taking in the sight before him. Sirius had not, it seemed, noticed his scrutiny, nor had the women, though several of them sighed at the romantic nature of Sirius's declaration. The blonde, however, was not deterred, and Remus's eyes narrowed as he saw her slender hand sliding higher up Sirius's thigh, as if seeking out proof he was not uninterested. "It is not your heart I'm after," the girl told him. Sirius grabbed the girl's wandering hand, putting it aside before it could reach its intended destination. He flashed the girl and those around her a winning smile. "With my heart went my ability to separate such things. Thank you, but I must decline." If anything, his words made the girls sigh again, more enamored than before. Indeed, Remus found his own heart pounding in his chest. Did Sirius know he was watching, or were his words genuine? And perhaps it was the height of arrogance to assume Sirius might be referring to him. Perhaps he merely did not care for any of those on offer and was looking for an easy way to let them down. But a quick glance at the girls left him doubting that last idea. The women were beautiful, and there were certainly plenty to choose from. For that matter, if Sirius preferred other company this night, there were men enough to choose from as well. More than one was eyeing the man hungrily enough. Or perhaps it was just that Sirius did not feel comfortable leaving Harry unguarded this night, though surely he knew Severus would not let Harry out of his sight, unless it was Severus he did not trust. Remus's heart was still pounding, and now so was his head. He had never dated, never played the games other men played with casual lovers and flirtations. He did not know how to deal with the emotions he was feeling, and the one person he would normally go to talk to about such turmoil was the very person causing all of it. And then there was the wolf inside of him, growling in anger and telling him he was being foolish, telling him simply that Sirius was his and he should take him and be done with it. The wolf had no conflict, and sometimes Remus envied its simplicity. "Remus?" He looked up from his musings to see that Sirius, Harry, and Severus were all waiting for him, obviously ready to retire for the night. Quickly, he bid his own companions good night, grabbed up his mace, and went to join them. An older woman was waiting to lead them to chambers for the night, and as they left the hall, more than one disappointed gaze stared after them. Severus, Remus noticed, put a proprietary hand on Harry's shoulder and steered him from the room, pausing only briefly to glare back at some of the younger women who had been watching his bondmate. Remus found himself falling into step beside Sirius. "Arm wrestling," Sirius murmured under his breath, and Remus threw him a glare, noticing the smirk of amusement on the man's face. "Wasn't my idea," he insisted. "They wouldn't leave me alone. Several of them came back more than once." "Gave them the excuse to touch you, didn't it?" Sirius told him, and Remus heard something odd in his voice, which caused him to look more closely at his companion. Though Sirius's mouth was still smiling, there was a gleam in his eye that wasn't precisely amusement. "What?" he asked in confusion. Sirius just shrugged carelessly, though the tension in his body spoke of something less casual. "Surely you noticed the attention you were attracting. I thought that blonde was going to carry you off." For one confusing moment, Remus tried to picture the blonde woman who had been touching Sirius's leg, trying to carry him off. But then it hit him that Sirius was in fact referring to the young blonde warrior who had been playing with his mace. And the odd look in Sirius's eyes suddenly made sense. Sirius Black was jealous. Amazement flooded through Remus's body. It was inconceivable. But judging by the look in Sirius's gaze, a wary and somewhat worried look that Remus had a hard time comprehending, the man was expecting some sort of response from him. Or perhaps hoping for some sort of response that Remus was uncertain how to deliver. He wanted to say something romantic and beautiful, like the thing Sirius had said to that girl. Something that might make Sirius's heart pound for an entirely different reason. But for once, words utterly failed him, and he was left with only the simple truth. "I hadn't noticed," he admitted, disappointed in himself that he could not find something more assuring to say. And miraculous, the truth seemed to be exactly what Sirius wanted, for he flashed Remus a blinding smile. "Yeah," he grinned. "I kind of figured." And when he slipped his arm around Remus's waist and pulled him to his side, Remus did nothing to stop him.